The musty smell permeated the humid basement air, and the solitary bulb swayed on its worn wire, casting wavering shadows against the concrete walls. I descended the steps slowly, feeling each creak of the wood beneath my feet, like bone snaps, in the silence. That's when I heard it, a female voice, low, broken, that didn't seem directed at me, but cut through the space like a razor. "Please don't hurt us." The words echoed like a plea made to a ghost or to an executioner. For an instant, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, that it was just loneliness resonating in the corners of the house. But before I could call my husband's name, the basement door opened violently with a dry bang, and he appeared, screaming like a cornered animal, as if he wanted to expel any invisible presence from there. He was sweaty, his tie loose, eyes wide, and there was an unmeasured fury in his expression, a fury that seemed to have no certain target. I instinctively shrank back, as if I were to blame for that mysterious plea. He came down the steps 2 at a time, kicking stacked boxes, throwing tools aside, as if searching for someone or something hidden. And yet, the basement was empty, save for the cold walls and the trembling lamp. The scene seemed to enact something already foreseen, as if he knew the voice would be there, as if he had expected the call. I remained standing in the middle of the steps, trying to catch my breath, but the question gnawed at me. Who had spoken? My own throat was too dry to emit any sound, and no, it hadn't been me. It had been another woman, from some point in that basement that now revealed itself without traces. "Did you hear it too?" I dared to ask, but he turned with such abruptness that the question died in me. "Nothing down here, just rats." "Forget it," he said, his voice laden with an order that admitted no reply. But forgetting wasn't possible. The words, fragile and desperate, had imprinted themselves in my ear like a tattoo. "Please don't hurt us." The plural tormented me more than anything. Who was us? Who were they who pleaded in the dark? And why had my husband, a millionaire with an impeccable facade, reacted with such lack of control, as if he were the guardian of a secret that shouldn't have come to light? While he went upstairs again, slamming the door hard behind him, I stayed down there alone, trying to decipher the echo. The dusty boxes held old papers, receipts from shell companies, objects I never recognized as ours. There were locked suitcases, all identical, lined up against the wall. One of them was slightly open, the lock forced, and I approached. Inside, only women's clothing, dresses, blouses, shoes, none of them mine. The smell of aged perfume mixed with the mildew, creating a nauseating sensation. I went back upstairs with trembling hands, and as I crossed the illuminated kitchen, I perceived the brutal contrast. The house was immaculate, with its expensive furniture and controlled silence, as if nothing abnormal had happened. He was already in the living room, sitting, drinking whiskey in short sips with the television on at low volume. He looked at me as if he expected my obedience in not touching the subject anymore. I sat across from him, and for minutes we were prisoners of an artificial silence, until an external sound broke the rhythm. Tires braking in the street, running footsteps, and then the neighbor's dogs barking. He got up abruptly, peered through the curtains, and said only, "Nothing to do." "With us, go to sleep." I obeyed but didn't sleep. Lying in bed, every creak of the house's wood seemed like another hidden step. And every time I closed my eyes, the whisper returned, "Please don't hurt us," in plural, in the dark. That phrase became my intimate ghost that night. It wasn't just an auditory echo, it was a veiled revelation. Something at the bottom of the basement held more than dust, and my husband, with his fortune, his power, and his temperament, seemed to be both the guardian and the threat. When dawn finally came, I knew it was no longer possible to look at our life the same way. It was just the first day of my new routine, a routine of lurking, of unasked questions, of evidence to be gathered, and one certainty gnawed at me. If there was someone who had asked for help in that house, perhaps I wasn't the only hostage of his silence. The next day was born with an oblique light crossing the curtains, and for a few seconds, in the nebulous state between sleep and wakefulness, I almost believed that the previous night had been just a nightmare. But then the whisper returned, vivid, with the same trembling intonation. "Please don't hurt us." I sat up in bed immediately, gasping, and the image of the basement flooded my mind. Beside me, my husband's body rested heavy, his face relaxed in deep sleep, as if he carried no shadow at all. The contrast revolted me. How could someone sleep so serenely after exploding in fury in the basement of their own house? I went down to the kitchen, trying to convince myself that routine could re-establish some kind of balance. The maid was already there, cutting fruit in silence. When she saw me, she smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. I asked if she had heard anything the previous night, voices perhaps. The knife's cutting stalled for an instant, but she quickly resumed the rhythm, shaking her head negatively. That small delay, that second when the blade stopped in the air, was enough to give me the answer I needed. She had heard something, but wouldn't dare speak. I spent the rest of the morning walking through the mansion as if I were an intruder in my own house. Every object seemed suspicious to me. Every locked door hid a world of secrets. In the library, I found piles of business folders, old contracts, but some papers were out of order, as if they had been consulted hastily. On a yellowed sheet, scribbled in pencil, there was a phrase in English, "They don't know yet." The handwriting wasn't his, and I didn't recognize whose it could be either. Folded and forgotten between pages of a financial report, the note made me tremble. At lunchtime, he appeared impeccable in his navy blue suit, the same look of absolute control he always used in business meetings. He sat at the table and commented on banalities about the market, about investors, about a gala dinner we would need to attend at the end of the week. I watched him as if he were a walking mask, a man capable of deceiving anyone with his rehearsed confidence. But I knew what I had seen, the uncontrolled fury, the sweat, the scream in the basement. When I dared mention the night, he left his fork suspended for a second. "Are you still thinking about that?" he asked, with a tone that mixed incredulity and veiled threat. "What you think you heard doesn't exist, and if you keep feeding fantasies, you'll end up hurting yourself." The warning sounded more like a sentence than concern. I swallowed hard and fell silent. In the afternoon, I decided to leave the mansion, under the pretext of visiting a friend. I needed air. I drove aimlessly until I stopped in front of an old coffee shop I used to frequent before getting married. The aroma of strong coffee and fresh bread brought me a memory of freedom I no longer felt. I sat in a discreet corner and opened my phone, scrolling through old messages. That's when I noticed something strange, a folder of automatically archived audios. Upon opening it, I found a short recording, just a few seconds, made at 2:14 a.m., the same time I had been in the basement. I pressed play with trembling hands. The female voice sounded clear, desperate. "Please don't hurt us." And in the background, the sound of hurried footsteps. My heart raced. It wasn't a product of my imagination. The recording was there, concrete, proof. But the file hadn't been made by me. The phone indicated synchronized device. Someone had connected my device to another system, probably from the house, maybe the internal cameras. My husband was recording or monitoring even the sounds of his own wife. Back at the mansion, I found the doors locked differently, as if the locks had been turned recently. The maid was no longer there, and the silence sounded even denser. I went up to the room with the feeling that every step was followed by invisible eyes. Inside his closet, among aligned cotton shirts, there was a wooden box with a simple clasp. I opened it without hesitation. Inside, old photographs, unknown. Women, some smiling in luxurious environments, others in rigid poses, always with my husband in the background. All the photos had the same inscription on the back, handwritten, precise dates, locations, and a symbol of an incomplete circle. I closed the box when I heard the door slam downstairs. He had returned earlier than expected. I hid in the bathroom, heart pounding, while the sound of footsteps slowly climbed the stairs. In that instant, I understood that the silence hanging over that house was heavier than any scream. It was an armed silence, planned, made to suffocate any attempt at truth. And alone there, leaning against the cold tile, I promised myself that I wouldn't allow myself to be swallowed by it. The desperate plea of the voice wasn't just hers. It was also mine. The following hours dragged as if time were corrupted against me. What before was just suspicion now became palpable matter. The recording on the phone, the hidden photographs, the signs of invisible surveillance. But the most disturbing thing was how everything camouflaged itself under the veneer of routine. My husband moved through the mansion with the same impeccable discipline, smiling at employees, taking business calls, scheduling trips and events. I, however, could no longer see in him the same man I married. Every gesture carried a shadow. Of calculation, every word seemed rehearsed to maintain control. At breakfast, he commented about a possible trip to Geneva, as if we were just aligning social agendas, but at the same time his eyes scrutinized mine as if searching for traces of what I knew, of what I would dare reveal. I felt like an actress, forced to sustain a dangerous role, smiling, responding sweetly, while inside nausea consumed me. The silence again was the trap. I needed to feign ignorance to survive. During the afternoon, I took advantage of a meeting he had in the mansion's private office to explore spaces I had avoided until then. The basement haunted me again, but this time I went prepared. I took a small flashlight hidden in my coat pocket. When I went down the steps, the air seemed heavier, as if the humidity were just the surface of something deeper. I passed by the aligned suitcases I had noticed before. 2 of them were in different positions, dragged a few centimeters out from the dust mark that outlined them. I couldn't resist. I pulled one forcefully. The padlock was intact, but there were metallic scratches on the clasp, signs that it had been opened and closed frequently. I put my ear close, total silence, but silence in that house was already proof. Behind the suitcases, I noticed a crack in the concrete wall. At first, it seemed like just a structural fissure, but when I brought the flashlight closer, I realized there was an almost geometric outline, as if it were a camouflaged door. I ran my fingers along the edges. There was no handle, just a cold surface, but the accumulated dust betrayed that it was used. Small contact stains like old fingerprints. The shock ran through my entire body. That wasn't just a basement, it was a hideout within the hideout. Before I could investigate further, I heard the sound of footsteps above me. He was back. I turned off the flashlight and ran upstairs, trying to recompose my expression as I emerged in the living room. I found him standing, holding a black folder, his countenance too serious for someone who claimed to have just resolved business matters. "What were you doing down there?" The question came dry without preambles. I answered quickly. "I was looking for a box with old albums. I thought I had stored it in the basement." He stared at me for a long time, as if measuring the weight of the lie. Then he nodded slowly and just said, "Don't mess with what you don't understand." That night, lying beside him, listening to the controlled breathing of someone who sleeps securely, I thought about what the phrase really meant. Don't mess with what you don't understand. It was a warning, but also a confession. There was something there, and it was too dangerous to be touched. The next day I had to go out with him to a charity dinner. The mansion was full of illustrious guests, journalists, businessmen, politicians. Everyone smiled and greeted him as if he were a pillar of reliability. I walked beside him as the perfect wife, but every camera flash reminded me of the suitcases in the basement, of the voice pleading, of the hidden door. The contrast made me dizzy. An elegant lady approached me and, in a confidential tone, commented, "You are very strong." I wouldn't have the courage to live with a man like him. I smiled mechanically, but inside my legs weakened. What did she mean? What was she trying to say? Before I could ask, she moved away, swallowed by the crowd. Back at the house already. Past midnight, I saw that one of the main corridor cameras was blinking red. That wasn't normal. I approached and realized it had been adjusted to record at different angles, as if it were tracking me. The feeling of being watched left my body, frozen. I took my phone and, when checking the synchronized files, found new recordings. They were no longer just audio. Now there were images of myself walking through the house alone at angles I didn't remember existing. The evidence was accumulating, but it was still only mine, and that made me vulnerable. With each discovery, the risk grew. His silence wasn't just an absence of words, It was a network of control, surveillance, manipulation that extended far beyond the walls. And I knew that sooner or later, the cracks in that perfect routine would no longer be subtle. They would collapse. When I finally fell asleep, it was with the certainty that the next time I went down to the basement, it wouldn't be just to observe. I would need to open the hidden door, whatever the cost. Dawn brought with it a strange sensation of anticipation, as if the house itself breathed differently. With every step down the corridor, I felt that the walls kept memories that didn't belong to me. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with traces of past lives, perhaps even taken. There, after the charity dinner, after the look from that lady who had insinuated knowing more than she should, the mask of normalcy was more fragile. I could no longer ignore the hidden door in the basement. I waited for him to leave for a meeting downtown, the armored car disappearing through the electronic gate. I then went down quickly, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The suitcases continued stacked, but the crack in the wall seemed clearer in the morning light that trickled through a small skylight. I ran my fingers again along the outline until I found an irregular point, a discrete cavity. I pressed. The surface vibrated with a metallic snap, and a small opening revealed itself, narrow, dark. The smell that escaped from inside was different, not the basement's mildew, but something acrid, chemical, like burnt paper and oxidized metal. I entered. The hidden space was a rectangular room, without windows, illuminated only by a weak fluorescent lamp, connected to an improvised wire. On the shelves, piles of folders, boxes of documents, and in the center, a metal table with an open folder. I recognized immediately bank statements, transfers to tax haven accounts, records of shell companies. But there was more. Photographs of different women, some smiling at social events, others captured in closed environments, always accompanied by handwritten notes, names, dates, locations, values. It was like a macabre catalogue of relationships bought and discarded. In the corner, a smaller box caught attention. Inside, newspaper clippings about unsolved disappearances. Young women, socialites, employees, some foreign. Each article had a red marking. Beside it, a leather agenda with pages numbered in code. Brief annotations, always accompanied by the symbol of the incomplete circle I had seen before. With each page, the feeling that my husband wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was involved in something much darker. Suddenly, a sound behind me made my body freeze, footsteps echoing in the basement. I turned off the flashlight and closed the folder quickly, trying to silence my own breathing. He shouldn't be back so early. The sound approached, heavy, rhythmic, until it stopped exactly in front of the hidden door. For a second, I thought I had been discovered, but instead, I heard only a metallic noise. He was locking the suitcases with new padlocks. Then, silence. My heart beat so loudly that I almost didn't notice when he went back upstairs. I waited long minutes before leaving, every muscle rigid with tension. I went up to the room, closed the door, and with trembling hands, took out my phone to photograph. Some pages of the agenda I had hidden inside my coat sleeve. Now I had proof, but proof against whom? Against the man who shared the bed with me? Against the same one society celebrated as a philanthropist? Against the model family man in business magazines? That night, I sat across from him in the living room, the fireplace lit, casting dancing shadows. He seemed calm, almost affectionate, talking about future trips and about a possible real estate investment abroad. The contradiction was unbearable. "Do you trust me?" I suddenly asked, my voice firmer than I expected. He raised his eyes, surprised, and smiled. "Of course I do. Always." The smile was perfect, but behind it, there was a wall. I knew he was also watching me, measuring every word, every movement. At dawn, I woke to the sound of light footsteps in the corridor. I got up slowly and opened a crack in the door. He was standing in front of one of the guest rooms, the phone glued to his ear. His voice low but clear enough for me to catch a phrase. "She's already starting to suspect. I need to act before it's too late." The blood froze in my veins. He was talking about me. I returned to bed in silence, lying down before he noticed. But there was no longer any possible rest. I had two options: remain motionless until being devoured by his secret, or risk everything to expose the truth. The photographs from the agenda, the documents from the hidden room, everything now needed to be used intelligently. I couldn't run to the police without strategy. He was too powerful, too influential. The next morning I made a decision. I called Clara, my childhood friend, the only person I still trusted. Inviting her to the mansion was impossible, too risky. We arranged to meet discreetly at an art gallery downtown. As I hung up the phone, I noticed my fingers were trembling. The weight of silence was no longer just his. It was also mine, and if I didn't speak, I would be an accomplice. When he entered, the room minutes later, wearing another impeccable suit, I found the strength to smile. The performance had to continue, at least until I could break the siege. The art gallery downtown seemed like an unlikely refuge, but it was there I chose to meet Clara. It was a spacious area, illuminated by skylights, full of modern sculptures that looked more like silent sentinels than harmless works. I walked among them with contained steps, my heart racing, as if each visitor were a potential informant. When I saw her, standing before an installation made of broken mirrors, I felt painful relief. Clara was the last fragment of my life before him, someone who knew my essence without the masks I had to adopt. She hugged me, but immediately noticed the rigidity of my body. "You're different," she said, her eyes searching mine. I didn't need to invent excuses. I took out my phone and quickly showed her the photos I had taken of the agenda and newspaper clippings. Her eyes widened. "My God, what is this? Are they women missing?" I nodded, unable to articulate a coherent explanation. The knot in my throat almost suffocated me. "I think he's involved, and I think I might be next." Clara squeezed my hand tightly. "You need to get out of that house." The answer seemed obvious, but impossible. I knew that any abrupt movement would trigger an immediate reaction from him. "He watches me. Cameras, audio. I don't know how far his network extends. I need stronger evidence before seeking help." She was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "I know someone. An ex-cop, now a private investigator. He doesn't scare easily, he can help you." I agreed to meet him at another time, but wouldn't reveal anything over the phone. The slightest sign of a leak could be costly. Clara understood and promised to be discreet. On the way out, before saying goodbye, she looked deep into my eyes. "Don't trust anyone but me. Not even me completely, if necessary. Only yourself." Her words were engraved like iron. Back at the mansion, the performance continued. We dined together. He asked about my visit to the gallery friend, and smiling, commented, "I hope you had fun. You've been very tense lately." Inside, I almost trembled at the idea that he already knew where I had been. I feigned naturalness, talked about exhibitions and fictional artists, and his smile remained. But his eyes pierced through me like blades, as if measuring every syllable. That night, I waited for him to fall asleep and went down to the basement again. I needed to confirm something. When I turned on the flashlight, I noticed the hidden door was different, closed more rigidly, the mechanism disguised, almost as if it had been reinforced. He knew someone had tampered with it. I trembled, but didn't retreat. I returned to the room without touching anything, so as not to give away my attempt. The risk of a premature confrontation was too great. 2 days later, Clara called me discreetly from a payphone. She said she had arranged a meeting with the investigator in the parking lot of an abandoned market, far from common cameras. I agreed. I arrived at the location at the appointed time, the cold night wind raising dust from the asphalt. A robust man with a graying beard and attentive gaze was waiting for me. His name was Ramos. He spoke little, but directly. "If what your friend told me is true, you're in the eye of a hurricane. I need physical evidence, papers, digital records, something that can be shown without leaving doubt." I handed him copies of the photos I had on my phone. He analyzed them calmly, shook his head. "It's serious, very serious, but it's not enough. You're dealing with someone who knows how to erase tracks. If you want to survive, you'll need to move with me." Total discretion. I returned home with the feeling of being divided between two worlds. On one side, the luxurious routine of a millionaire's wife, smiling at events wearing jewelry. On the other, clandestinity, secret meetings, the growing weight of evidence. In both worlds, the threat was the same, him. That same night, when lying down, he surprised me with a whispered question. "Do you trust me?" The question was almost identical to the one I had asked days before. "Yes," I replied, the lie choking in my throat. He smiled, closed his eyes, and in a few minutes fell asleep. But I know the smile was more mask than rest. Shortly after, I heard a noise coming from the garden. I peeked through the window and saw a shadow discreetly crossing the side fence. Someone was watching the house. It wasn't Clara nor Ramos. Another piece was in play, and I still didn't know if it was threat or salvation. The survival pact was established, me, Clara, and Ramos against the invisible web he wove. But the circle around me was tightening, and each wrong step could be the last. The following weeks became a minefield. Every gesture I made inside the mansion seemed accompanied by invisible eyes. Every word exchanged with Clara or Ramos was measured in the silence of the night, as if the very air had ears. The shadow I saw in the garden didn't appear again, but the memory of that silhouette crossing the fence didn't leave me in peace. Who else was involved in this game? Would my husband, so careful, have enemies lurking or just accomplices monitoring my every step? At breakfast, I found the newspaper open on the table. The headline spoke about the disappearance of a young foreign model. Her photo was familiar. I searched my memory until I remembered. It was among the images from the hidden folder in the basement. My stomach churned. He noticed my shock and smiled, serving coffee as if it were a banal gesture. Sad, isn't it? Life is fragile. The comment sounded like a provocation. That same day, Ramos sent me an encrypted message through an app he had installed on my phone. I discovered something. Your audios and videos are being transmitted to an external server, IP address linked to shell companies. I can trace it, but it will be risky. If he notices, you'll be in immediate danger. I replied only, "Do it." The choice was already made. There was no going back. While Ramos investigated, Clara approached me cautiously. She began frequenting the mansion under the pretext of being my company on lonely afternoons. He seemed to accept her, even treated her politely, but I noticed a spark of distrust in his eyes. One afternoon, while having tea on the veranda, Clara let slip, "I can't understand how you stand living like this with so much surveillance." Before I could respond, I heard footsteps. He was behind us, smiling, bringing a bottle of wine. "I hope my wife isn't boring you with her paranoia." The look he gave me was a blade. That night, I received another message from Ramos. The server contains surveillance records of several women. Dates, times, recorded conversations. He doesn't just monitor you. I read the phrase repeatedly, heart racing. The voice from the basement, the "please don't hurt us," might be more than an echo of an invisible prisoner. It might be part of a living archive, someone who was still there in some corner of the house or another place he controlled. The tension exploded days later when two plainclothes police officers appeared at the mansion. They said they were investigating the disappearance of the model from the headline. He received them with all elegance, showed documents, displayed his impeccable business routine. I, from afar, pretended distraction, but observed every detail. At one point, one of the officers looked at me, lingering as if wanting to communicate something in silence, but he didn't dare speak. When they left, he closed the door and stared at me. "You didn't say anything to them, did you?" The question wasn't innocent. I shook my head, swallowing my fear. He studied me for long seconds, then walked away. The following dawn, I went down to the basement again. I was determined to open at least one of the suitcases. I used a small screwdriver that Ramos had given me at our last meeting. Forcing the padlock, I managed to break the clasp of one of the bags. Inside, to my horror, there were piles of documents. Passports, identities, credit cards with different names and faces. Some were from women I recognized from the photos. Others from people I had never seen. Everything meticulously organized, as if they were catalogs of false lives. While I was leafing through them, I heard a metallic noise behind me. I turned, with the flashlight trembling. The hidden door was ajar, and behind it the muffled sound of human breathing. My heart almost stopped. I wasn't alone there. I approached slowly, each step echoing like a sentence. I pushed the door carefully. On the other side, the narrow space opened to a smaller, humid, poorly lit corridor, and at the end of it, a female silhouette huddled on the ground, with wide eyes. When the flashlight beam reached her, she raised her head and whispered in English, "Please don't hurt us." It was the same voice, but before I could react, an electrical crack shook the lights, and the door behind me closed forcefully. I was locked in, and for the first time I understood that the siege wasn't just psychological, it was physical. He knew I would get there. He had prepared the ground. The sound of the door closing behind me was like a sentence. The metallic echo vibrated through the narrow corridor, and the air seemed rarefied. The woman in front of me continued huddled, her eyes moist, breathing short, as if she didn't know whether I was threat or salvation. I approached slowly, trying to control the tremor in my hands. "I won't hurt you," I whispered in English. She blinked incredulous but didn't retreat. There were marks on her wrists as if she had been tied up. My heart hammered in my chest. So it wasn't just paranoia, it wasn't just papers. There were real people trapped in his labyrinth. Before I could say more, an intense light turned on above us, blinding, cutting through the corridor. His voice echoed through the hidden sound system, calm but loaded with poison. "You shouldn't be here." The woman beside me shuddered, shrinking even more. I turned in all directions, looking for an exit, but there were only cold walls. "The siege was complete. Now you understand," he continued. "The things I keep, the people I control, everything has a purpose, and you, my dear, are not above it." Rage burned in me, replacing part of the fear. "These women aren't your business, their lives," I shouted, my voice broken by the echo. The silence that followed was worse than any answer. Then a metallic click. A small side door opened, and he appeared, impeccable, as if it weren't dawn, as if it weren't a prison, but a meeting. Fitted suit, sharp gaze, contained smile. He walked toward us with calculated slowness. The woman beside me began to cry silently. "You never understood," he said, fixing his eyes on me. "All of this is about power, not about money, not about love. Whoever controls fear controls the world, and I control fear." His words pierced my chest like blades. It was a confession, but also a manifesto. I tried to interpose my body between him and the prisoner. "If you touch her, I swear that—" The threat died in my throat because I knew I had no weapons, no strength, but he just laughed low. "You still think you have a choice." Suddenly, Ramos's voice echoed from somewhere above us, through a megaphone. "House surrounded, come out now." My heart almost exploded. He had come. I wasn't as alone as I had imagined. My husband's smile contracted into something darker. "You called reinforcements. Useless. They don't have enough evidence. And if they try to enter, they'll only find rubble." He advanced, but I retreated, grabbing the woman's hand beside me. "Come with me," I murmured, pulling her through the narrow corridor. We ran to an iron staircase hidden at the end of the tunnel. Behind us, the sound of firm footsteps, the echo of pursuit. We climbed, the steps vibrating under our weight, until, reaching a disguised exit in the mansion's winter garden. The glass walls reflected the light of police flashlights outside. It was there that the final confrontation began. He emerged from the staircase right behind us, gun in hand, his face illuminated by an almost serene fury. "You don't understand. What you're doing, you're destroying everything we built." His voice didn't tremble, as if he believed every word. I turned to him, eyes fixed on the weapon, and replied, "There's no construction based on silence and blood, only ruin." The sirens echoed outside, red and blue lights reflecting on the glass walls. It was as if we were in an aquarium exposed to the world without hiding places. He raised the gun, aiming at me. "Then it will end here." But before the shot echoed, Ramos's shadow crossed through the side glass, breaking it with a sharp blow followed by a deafening crash. He threw himself against my husband, the hand-to-hand fight spreading across the marble floor. The gun fell and slid to near me. For a second, I hesitated. Taking it meant crossing a line I never thought I'd cross. But the woman's scream behind me brought me back. "Please don't hurt us." I took the gun. Its cold weight in my hands seemed more real than any luxury in that house. I aimed, my hands trembling, breathing failing. My husband and Ramos fought just meters away, each blow echoing like thunder. He looked into my eyes, even in the middle of the fight, and smiled. "You can't do it." The truth is, I couldn't. The trigger remained untouched, but I didn't need to. Ramos, with a sharp blow, managed to immobilize him, handcuffing him with a pair of improvised metal bracelets. My husband's roar reverberated through the glass room, more beast than man. "This isn't over. You think you won. I still control fear." The police entered shortly after, flooding the space with lights and voices. They took him handcuffed, while he repeated his phrases like a war mantra. The survivor and I were quickly removed. The cold of dawn cut my skin, but the sensation of immediate freedom was so intense it almost hurt. The house, with its broken glass walls and exposed secret corridors, was no longer a home. It was an undone prison, an open wound for everyone to see, but deep down I knew he was partly right. That wasn't over, because controlling fear wasn't just his power. Now it was also the shadow I would carry. The first night after the mansion's fall was one of unbearable silence. Not the same armed silence that reigned inside the glass house, but a silence of rubble, of air burned by recent memory. I was staying in an apartment rented by the police to temporarily protect me, an anonymous building. White walls, simple furniture. The space should have brought me comfort, but the emptiness weighed more than any prison. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face being taken handcuffed, still smiling, still proclaiming that he controlled fear. The news spread in a few hours. Television showed images of the invaded mansion, of the documents found, of the false passports and hidden rooms. Newspapers spoke of an international network of manipulation and kidnapping, of a collapsed empire. But what didn't appear in any headline was the essential detail. That man, venerated as a millionaire benefactor, was also the husband who shared my bed, the owner of secrets that almost swallowed me. Clara stayed by my side as she could, bringing clean clothes, trying to distract my mind with banal conversations. But the weight in her eyes betrayed that she also felt crushed by what we discovered. "You survived," she repeated, as if wanting to convince me of it. I knew that surviving was just the first step. Rebuilding would be much harder. Ramos visited me on the second day, bringing folders and reports. The police work was expanding, and he seemed more exhausted than ever. "Your husband didn't act alone. The records point to connections outside the country, shell companies, accomplices at various levels. It's going to be a long investigation." I nodded, trying to absorb the dimension of it all. "And me?" I asked. He sighed. "You're a key piece. Your courage started everything, but it also means you'll be at the center of the storm for a long time." His words echoed through the dawn when I tried to sleep. The ghost of the female voice didn't abandon me. The woman I rescued, whose name I discovered was Emily, was in a secure clinic receiving care. I would visit her soon. Her look, when she held my hand during the rescue, still burned in my memory. A mixture of terror and gratitude, of life snatched from death. Days later, I returned to the mansion, escorted by police, to retrieve some belongings. Walking through those corridors was like crossing an abandoned battlefield. The shattered glass still covered the winter garden. The basement exhaled the smell of rust and damp papers. The hidden door was wide open, revealing its secret to the world. It was strange to see the horrors exposed without more masks. I took only a small jewelry box, not for its value, but for symbolizing a part of life that needed to be closed. I left the rest behind. As I was leaving, a memory pierced me like a blade. The night I first heard the whisper in the basement. That phrase, "Please don't hurt us," had changed everything. It was the cry that opened the crack, that tore me from comfortable illusion. If it weren't for it, I would still be living under the invisible dominion of fear. The following weeks became a ritual of new beginnings. Sessions with psychologists, meetings with investigators, sleepless nights writing, testimonies. Gradually, pain gave way to a silent strength. The survival routine now became a reconstruction routine. Clara said I seemed older but also more solid, as if the weight had molded a new version of me. Perhaps it was true. A month later, I sat, alone on a park bench, the late afternoon sun warming my skin. Children played around, couples strolled, life continued. I took out my phone and, by instinct, opened the old audio folder. The file with the whisper was still there. I pressed play one last time. The voice echoed in the earphone, "Please don't hurt us." I closed my eyes, allowing the phrase to reverberate, but this time not as fear. It was memory. It was proof that I had crossed the abyss and was still alive. My husband was behind bars, but his network still breathed in the shadows. I knew more battles would come, but in that instant I chose the simple. Breathe deeply, feel the sun's warmth, believe for a second that it was possible to exist outside the invisible prison he had created. Life, finally, seemed to restart in silence, a different silence, no longer that of surveillance but that of the promise of freedom, and fragile, uncertain but mine.